first thing I would like to address is actually there was an article in this morning's San Francisco Chronicle in regards to the alignment of the deck sections on the suspension span. And the position of the project is that this is not an issue. It does not affect the structural stability of the bridge. It does not affect the bridge's 150-year lifespan or the ability to reopen the bridge after an earthquake. There was a reference to a comment from Marwan Nader in the paper, who works for T.Y. Lin Moffett Nickel, the design venture for the project, who stated that there could be some local damage after an earthquake where these issues of the misalignment on the deck occurs. And he clarified that to me this weekend, meaning inconsequential damage at these very specific locations, and you would not see anything more than you would normally see in the event of a major earthquake. What we're talking about when we say misalignment is at most an 8 mm difference between the two decks. The public does not feel this or see this whatsoever. The decks are covered with 2 inches of asphalt. This does not affect their ability to drive on the bridge whatsoever. And the next one we will move on to is water. Just to give everyone an update on what is happening with the leaks inside the suspension span. Do not have a whole lot more additional information since we last spoke on this about a week or so ago. Again, just want to reiterate that we do know that water is getting into the barrier rails along the suspension span. This is the only place on the bridge where this is occurring, is on the suspension span. It is dripping down through the bolts. There are 2,600 bolts that connect the barrier rail to the deck sections. Of those, approximately 30% is where the water is dripping in. So it's not at every bolt, it's approximately 30%. We are still determining exactly how the water is getting into the barrier rail. We're still chasing that back. It's supposed to rain this week, and that might yield some additional information as to exactly how it's getting into the barrier rail. Again, just want to reiterate, this was an anticipated issue. We were prepared for this, and we are managing it. The inside of the deck is primed. There are leak holes, and the most critical areas are sealed and dehumidified. I think it was put out there that water has dripped into the anchorages where the cable strands splay out. But again, we have dehumidification in there, and the dehumidification units are taking care of any drops of water that have gotten in. And again, we want to remind everyone that the bridge is still under construction. There is still work going on. Again, when the bridge opened last September, that was all structural and seismic work was completed, but there's still additional work going on, everything from preparing the tower for a maintenance elevator to be installed later this year. There's electrical work, bike path work, so we're still buttoning up the bridge. When the deck sections were being put into place, when the cable was being put into place, a lot of that was exposed. Water got in at that time, and that's why when the sections did leave China, they were primed on the inside to protect against water. There are leak holes. There's dehumidification. We anticipated water, and we have the steps in place to manage this issue. Next is demolition or dismantling, however you choose to describe it, of the original span. I think some of the more recent activity that's been visible is the contractor is actively removing the upper deck of what we call the Yerba Buena Island detour, what you call it the S-curve. So that work is taking place right now, and the steel and concrete is being removed and recycled. All steel from both the cantilever and the S-curve are going locally to a local recycler in Oakland called Schnitzer Steel. Less visible work that's been taking place on the cantilever is preparation for the separation of the cantilever, and I don't have a date yet. They're still working on the schedule, but we will bring you back when they begin to kind of separate the cantilever at mid-span. But they're installing support steel. They're doing jacking to help prepare that structure to be cut in half. They're also installing timber on the bottom deck. They've removed about, if I can recall, about 1,400 feet of the upper deck of the cantilever, and they've removed about 600 feet of the bottom roadway of the cantilever. And on the bottom roadway, they're replacing that 600 feet with timber, and that really reduces the stress and weight on the bridge, and that means they can bring in heavier equipment to work on that bottom deck and reach up through that 1,400-foot wide gap in the upper deck to start taking down the truss structure. All right. The bike path. When the bridge opened back in September, we did open the bike path up to about, I think, towards about halfway point of the SAS, if I recall. But obviously, The S-curve and the cantilever are in the way of completing it to the island, but also at the Oakland end, there was a temporary connector because the original eastbound lanes were blocking completion of the Oakland side. We anticipate the Oakland side to be completed in April. The public has been on a temporary path, which includes that steep connector since September. After about 6 months, and we anticipated the work could take anywhere from 6 months to 12 months, depending on weather. But after about 6 months, the end of that work is in sight, and the bike path travels along the side of the eastbound deck. And so sometime, most likely in the beginning of April, there will need to be a closure of the path to make that connection into the permanent connector into Oakland. We don't know exactly how long yet. The bike path will need to be closed. We will concentrate as many of those days as possible during the week when traffic is lightest and do our best to avoid the weekend. If there's no other questions than that, we will move on to the last two topics, which are about the rods on the bridge. And right now, one of the tests that we're doing is called the Townsend test, or stress corrosion test, where the threaded ends of rods are placed in a highly concentrated saltwater bath, and a highly corrosive environment, much more highly corrosive than anything they're out in the bridge. They're not in water on the bridge, and then they're taken to tension until they break. You want them to break, and then so that you get a sense of at what tension level they break, and then you take them to a lab to do additional testing. So here are the results of the latest Townsend test we've done. One of the rods that we did it's called an E2 upper bearing rod. It's basically one of the rods that's used to connect seismic devices at the east end of the suspension span to the road decks. That rod is at 70% tension in the field. After 6 days of holding that rod at 85% in this test, it was tensioned until it broke at 101%. There is a tower anchor rod. This is one of the rods that holds the tower at its base out in the field. This rod is at 50% tension level. In this test, we held it for, again, it starts at a very low level. We brought it up to 85% tension level, and that was held for 6 days. And then we continued to tension it until it broke at 117% tension level. There is also a rod at the top of the tower that holds the saddle that the cables pass through. This one is at 40% tension level in the field. And we held that one for 13 days at 85%, and then began to tension that until it broke or failed. But we've actually reached the limits of the jacks that are out there, and that one did not break. And then there are 4 anchor rods. These are rods that anchor the main cable inside the decks. These were not the anchor rods themselves. We had a few spares, but they were from the same lot, and they had the same characteristics. All 4 are at 40% out in the field of tension level. Again, these were brought up to 85% tension level after 6 days, or I'm sorry, these were brought up to 85% tension level for 6 days. And then after that, one broke at 110%, another broke at 2 broke at 110%, one broke at 118%, and another broke at 120%. So it's too early to draw any conclusions just from this one test. We're looking at different tests. This is just one data point, but we are seeing very significant differences between all the other rods on the bridge that we've been testing and that initial batch that broke, I would say almost 11 months ago now. And again, all other rods continue to function as expected on the bridge. But again, these test results are encouraging. These broke at much higher tension levels in a much more corrosive environment than they're at on the bridge.
Is this bridge now, and will it in the future perform as designed?
Yes.
Will this bridge last 150 years as promised?
Yes.
Will this bridge be able to withstand the largest credible earthquake in a 1,500-year cycle and be able to be put back into service on a lifeline schedule?
Yes, that is what the engineers and designers and construction team adamantly believe, and that is the purpose of a technical briefing such as this, to make sure that we are on the right path, to explain the path that we are on, to ensure that all elements, including these rods, are going to do the job that they were designed to do, so this bridge will last 150 years. Any other questions? Thank you.